Hi everyone, my name is James Feeney. Welcome to or back to my channel. Today we are going to be talking about communication with deity, how you might go about it, some methods and tips and tricks I have for facilitating it, what it all means. So this is going to work for, I think, both beginners and those who already have established some relationship or practice with deity or a higher power. I'm using the word deity as in more of a godlike figure, but I think that this and these methods can apply to higher powers of all sort, whether they are personified or archetypal, whether you imagine them more psychologically or as sentient beings outside of yourself. This video is inspired partly by a comment I received recently on a video where somebody asked what decks I might use to communicate with deity or the deities that I work with. And I couldn't really fit my answer or response finitely into a comment, so I figured I would make a video. So thank you if you're out there watching, and I hope this can answer your question in some more depth than I could in that comment. But as you may know from some of my videos that I've made, I work with the Sheila Na Gig. This is her altar. This is a sort of divine feminine altar, sacred feminine, that is allocated just for her. It's her space. And over on my main altar, I have a bit of a setup for Gabriel, the angel Gabriel. So right there, we see sort of this cross pantheon thing going on. The Sheila Na Gig originates in Ireland, or more Celtic mythologies, very folky and natural. And Gabriel as an angel isn't often thought of as a sort of godlike figure, but as more of a higher power that can be linked to Abrahamic religions, Christianity, Judaism, things of that sort. So I am working with different entities that aren't so hard and fast thought of as gods in either of their respective realms, but I do work with them and find it very fruitful. So I have a video on working with deity. I have videos speaking to the Sheila Na Gig and Gabriel and my work with them, so I will try to link all of that below or in the cards above in case you're looking for just some background knowledge. But if you're out there and looking to engage with higher powers of any sort, or already sort of are, and want some ways to communicate effectively with them in the world around you and to receive messages and to have that dialogue, I'm hoping I can offer, through my own experience, some of my own tips and tricks and things I've found that work for me. So as far as decks that I might use, which was the original question posed, decks I might use to communicate with either of my deities that I work with, I say I can use pretty much any deck. I don't have a deck allocated to either of them. I've tried that. I do have a sort of Doreen Virtue Gabriel Angel deck that I had on my altar for a while. For Gabriel, I also was using the Angel Tarot, I believe it is. It has a sort of demon tarot counterpart to it. I was using those for a bit and just found that it felt a little bit more performative and wasn't adding the depth and what I wanted out of the communication. Likewise, for the Sheila Na Gig, I've tried using the Dark Goddess Tarot, which I sometimes use. I don't usually use the Dark Goddess Tarot for divination because each card has a goddess, and to me that's a lot of energy, so it's a lot to do a reading with that. So I've found that just any old tarot deck or any old oracle sort of divination deck works well at the time that I need it to. I view myself as a reader, and so I look to decks that I feel very comfortable reading with. It's almost like my vocabulary, my language, and so when I'm using that, I can then translate, for example, what I might be receiving from Gabriel or the Sheila Na Gig. Now, a few examples. I mean, the Thoth Tarot for me is so easy to understand because I use it so often. For me, it's one that there's no confusion here, so nothing gets lost in translation. So I would say if you want to use tarot or cards to communicate with deities or higher powers, pick the decks that you feel really comfortable with, that you understand well, instead of picking a deck that you think fits thematically with the deity or the higher power. If you want to take the time to get to know a deck like that to the point where you feel like you can use it very fluidly, that's great, but I wouldn't go out of your way to get one and then not feel like you can quite understand what's happening with it. Likewise, like I spoke to with Gabriel, having that Doreen Virtue Gabriel Oracle deck, the messages were really limited and sort of reductive, things like communication and reaching out to others with keywords and simplistic images. That is not diverse enough in imagery or possibility to offer a comprehensive or complex message. Now, getting past the cards, I actually don't really use cards or cardomancy very often in communication with deity at all. For me, it's not the most effective means of initiating or maintaining or having any sort of communication with a higher power. There are times when I will do readings at either of these altars or even just on the fly where I try to tune in or tap into or reach out to one of these deities for messages in some way. That does happen, but I don't really use tarot or any sort of card when I'm communicating with them for the most part. When I want to get really deep, meaningful experiences, communication, more visual sorts of experiences, I don't use the tarot or any sort of cardomancy. So you might be thinking, how is it that I communicate with them then? So for me, I would say meditation and sort of astral travel or astral type realm activities, I guess, is the best way to describe it, is when I communicate with deity the most, or either of the deities that I work with. It's more of a meditative state that I reach, and I have videos on, I think, meditation and astral sort of projection and travel, so I'll try to remember to link those. But for me, it really is about getting myself to a space where I can almost have this imaginative world or be in an astral sort of realm where I can then see them, I can hear them, I can communicate with them. And for me, that works the best because then I can have a very verbal seeming dialogue, or at least a dialogue through more, I would say, psychic-like images, if that makes sense. So I think the possibilities and the nuance and the complexity of the dialogue and communication goes up like 100-fold when I take the time to meditate or reach that sort of state where I can then communicate with Gabriel or the Sheila Na Gig. I also find that having a space set up for either of them keeps them close to me in some way, whether that's energetic, magically, whether it's just psychological. Seeing a space where they kind of exist that's also within my space, I think facilitates communication and almost ramps up the amount of messages I feel like I receive from them on a regular basis, if that makes sense. Getting to know the deity or higher power you're working with, I think, is crucial. And even if you work with the same higher power or deity as somebody else, you may receive or communicate with it, them, he or she very differently. So for me, Gabriel, I see as more of this abstract being who doesn't really take on a human-like form too often. And to me, he presents as a man. So it's more about light and sound for me with Gabriel, and that's something I've come to identify over time, which is why I say getting to know the power or deity you're working with is really important. So when I see flashes of light, or light that's sort of sparkling or shining in very unique and distinctive ways, to me, I tend to attribute that to Gabriel as some sort of message to pay attention or to look at that thing or to sit and think about maybe the thought that was currently going through my mind. So when I see light shining through my window in a unique way, when I'm out in public and some sort of weird light pattern appears, to me that would be very real world communication with Gabriel. So that's more up for interpretation. That's not where I'm meditating and actively having a dialogue, but it is real world messages and forms of communication. And sometimes I'll ask for these sorts of messages and signs. And so if I've asked and then I receive one soon after, I do really pay quite a bit of attention to it. And with Gabriel, there's also the element of sound. So sound and light are really important with him and the way I work with him. So those ringings that you sometimes get in your ear, or sounds that sort of take me out of my present moment, are things that I pay attention to. So if I get a ringing in my ear, if a weird sound flashes across, if I hear something out of just off in the distance that feels like it really stands out, I'm going to pay attention to it. If there's maybe static, the sound of static, or usually high-pitched, odd sounds, those are things that I would consider communication or messages from Gabriel. And so perhaps you work with, I know many people out there work with the Morgan, and I know many of them look to things like crows and feathers and birds. That's a really great way if you feel like that's something that comes into your life and fits with your deity. With the Sheila Na Gig, as far as everyday sort of messages and communication goes, I would say she's a lot more earthy and dark, so the way that shadows might fall at night or when I've lit candles, or the way that a shadow is cast on the ground, she really likes the darkness, she likes the new moon, and so the new moon, I am really looking for signs and symbols, because that's something I've found in my own experience with her that is powerful, that she connects to. Also water and the earth, so when I'm in a forest, when I'm near a body of water of some sort, I'm looking and more attuned to sort of anomalies or strange occurrences that appear in those areas that I might connect to the Sheila na gig and who she is and the messages that I tend to perceive or receive from her. Now, the reasoning behind communication with both of these deities to me is just as important as the communication itself. Why you want to converse, why you want to connect. For me, working with deity and having some sort of dialogue or communication is, well, the purpose for me at least, is that I want to learn from them. I feel like there's something that I can bring into my everyday life. They have lessons to teach me, and they can also sort of enhance the way that I live my everyday life by potentially guiding me. So I feel like I offer something to them, maybe through their sacred space, and by giving things and offerings to them, and in turn, through honoring them and giving offerings, I receive some guidance or direction toward things that might suit me better or might serve me better in the world around me. So it really is this sort of reciprocity or symbiotic relationship. To me, while deity is a higher power, I don't like to think of myself as less than either of them. To me, it is a lot more of a very respectful, it is a very respectful relationship. So I'm not saying that I have this sort of peer-like banter all the time, but I don't think that you need to view yourself as being entirely less than these higher powers that you might work with. Sometimes I view Gabriel as more of this older brother figure and the Sheila na gig as more of a motherly figure. That's just how it works for me. And like I said, having the space, having the representations of the deity or higher power that fit with your sort of like visual mindset of how you imagine them to be is important. So I have this one statue of the Sheila na gig right here that I got at a secondhand shop, and it was really calling out to me when I felt like I was receiving a lot of messages from her at that time. I also created this painting on a rock, and so the space really encapsulates her colors, her energy, all of those sorts of things. Likewise, I took off my main altar some sort of visual representations of Gabriel. This is one I got on Etsy. It is a really well done replica of a painting of Gabriel from, I believe it's an Eastern European church. And so this is one, I am particular about visual depictions of the deities I work with. For example, there are a lot of Sheila na gig statues that don't call out to me, that I don't feel just right with, that I wouldn't purchase for myself. And there are a lot of depictions of Gabriel that I look at and don't feel like it resonates with my relationship with him. So this was one that I felt very called to. It's kind, it's sort of endearing, it's comforting, and so I have that out there on my altar. And I also love the way that at certain times in the day, light will come through my window and hit the spots where I've set up things for him. So that sort of plays into the communication aspect as well. Likewise, I have this smaller statue. It has him as more of a scribe with a quill and some paper or a scroll. For me, that's important. Communication with Gabriel a lot of times can happen through free writing, through journaling, through meditation and clearing of the mind, and then writing. So as getting to know your deity or a higher power and understanding how they function in your life, Gabriel presides over a lot of communication and writing and messages as it is. So I do turn to books and writing to look for messages from him or to communicate with him. I do think that the most streamlined, straightforward communication comes from that astral travel, from that more meditative state where I can visualize and actively be in the presence of, in real time, either of the deities. But when I'm looking to my mundane everyday world, these are methods that I would also look for messages and ways to incite communication. With the Sheila na gig, I'll sometimes write notes or letters and either burn them or put them into some body of water or bury them. And in that way, I feel like I'm giving them to her by either destroying them, because she is really involved with the cycles of birth and death and rebirth, or by kind of giving it back to the earth. And all those sorts of things play in. The types of offerings I would give her or Gabriel are very different as well, and those play into how I communicate, because when you are offering someone something, that is a form of communication. Communication is not just verbal. There's emotion, there is body language, there's decision making, there's action, and all of those communicate something. So in the same way that I might perform a kind gesture for somebody without saying anything, or even being in their presence when it happens, I am in some way communicating something to them when they receive whatever it was that I've done, or the effects of that thing. That might happen with a deity. They do something, or something is changed that you can kind of tell fits in alignment with who or what they are, and you receive it in some way. So communication, I would say, if you're setting yourself up or thinking for a communication that's going to be extremely direct and verbal, you might be disappointed. And if you are really looking for that, I would say investing in astral travel and meditations in altered states of some sort of journeying might be really beneficial for you, because then you can actively see in a very sensory experience that deity and speak with them in that way. And I have had that. And the way that I imagine the Sheila Nagig looks nothing like her statue when I am in those sorts of states. In fact, she's usually quite modest, actually, which is very funny considering how her statues are depicted. But in my more journey-like astral states, when I am actively in her presence communicating, she's very much in a cloak with a hood. She keeps herself quite hidden. Her face is sometimes out of sight. She's very deep and soft at the same time, and powerful, almost like a deep vibration that threatens to sort of dismantle something, or a depth that you might get lost in. Whereas Gabriel at times takes on a more human-esque type form in those altered states, but at other times he seems just like a ball of light and really high frequency sound. And I find that that fits a lot with the real world sort of way he communicates as well. So there's that. And that being that, with the cards, I know that that isn't quite the answer to the question in what decks I use to communicate with deity, but I would say for me personally, cartomancy and tarot are not the best methods for communicating with deity. They feel a bit limited in their scope, and I almost attach cartomancy to just different forms of divination for myself and clients that's more outside of the realm of a sentient power or an archetype or an energy. So I hope that helps, but I would be curious to know about all of you out there who potentially work with archetypes, energies, higher powers, deities, how you communicate with them and what works best. If you do use cards and find them to be really effective, how does that work for you? I know we're all different, so I'm hoping that sharing these tips and tricks can be beneficial to somebody out there who's looking to start up communication, or even to somebody who has a very established relationship with a higher power who's just looking for different methods they might try out. I know visual sort of talismans and things for me are really big. For example, I'm wearing this Gabriel necklace right now, but I think that covers pretty much the whole gambit of how it works. I also focus on sort of time and temporal elements, so the Sheila Nagig really enjoying the darkness, she enjoys the new moon, and so I'm more, I would say, in alignment with what she feels like during those times, so the communication feels stronger, whereas with Gabriel, light is a lot more important, so daytime, bright sunny days, and the full moon are times when I would probably be more likely to be in tune with Gabriel to receive messages. I think I have to be also in the receptive state, and when I am in a state that is what feels very connected to either of these deities, I feel like I'm more likely to receive the messages when I declare that I'm open to them as well. I hope that was helpful and interesting. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed it, and until next time, bye.